So welcome everyone to this Houseman's online event. Thank you so much for joining us. We're here to celebrate the publication of Sarah's new book, Work Won't Love You Back, How Devotion to Our Jobs Keeps Us Exploited, Exhausted and Alone. Sarah's going to be exploring some of the key issues in her book tonight, and she's also going to be chatting with two of the workers who feature in the book, Kate and Ray. So thank you so much to Kate and Ray for joining us tonight and sharing your experiences. And of course, thank you to Sarah for participating in this event. Just before I hand over to Sarah, I'm going to run through some basic housekeeping guidelines, just to ensure the event runs smoothly. So apologies to those of you who are very familiar with Zoom, but just in case there's members of the audience who haven't used Zoom before, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there is a Q&A box and a chat box. The chat box is for you to chat with members of the public, so members of the audience. And if you want to participate in the discussion by commenting on something that's been said or by asking Sarah, Kate and Ray a question, please use the Q&A box, because that is where Sarah will be looking tonight. So as I say, if you want to participate in the discussion, remember to use the Q&A box. To help Sarah, please try and keep your questions and comments brief and as succinct and as clear as possible. If for any reason we are disconnected, please bear with us. We'll try to reconnect as soon as possible, but fingers crossed, everything has gone smoothly so far. So I think that's about it from me. I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, and I hope you all enjoy the event and keep safe, and hopefully we'll see you in the shop as soon as possible. Take care, everyone. See you later. Bye.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you everyone who is here. I was just saying before we turn the camera on that I always feel a bit like I'm shouting into the void here. So it's very nice to know that you're all there, even though I can't see your faces. And so I'm Sarah Jaffe. I'm a journalist. I write about work in the various ways in which it's terrible. And I wrote this book, which is here behind me, about how we came to love our jobs, or at least to be forced to pretend to love our jobs, which is a history of the changes in capitalism over the past several decades, told through stories of working people of past and present. So I am being joined tonight by two of those people who talked to me for this book and let me into their lives, Ray Malone and Kate O'Shea, and I'm going to give them a few minutes to introduce themselves to you shortly. But just to set up our conversation a little bit more, I wanted to talk a little bit about the book and the way it's shaped, which is going to then end up shaping our conversation. So I divided the book into two halves for the two halves of this sort of narrative of the labor of love. The first half of the book is based in women's caring work that is mostly expected to be done unpaid in the home out of love for your family, and other types of work that then draw a lot of their characteristics and expectations from that. So I move from unpaid caring work in the home to paid caring and cleaning work, teaching retail work in the nonprofit sector. And then in the second half of the book, I based that in the story of the arts, creative work, and the idea of the sort of unique magical genius who does that creative work because they love it and not because it's work. And from there, I moved through unpaid internships, academia, the tech industry, and then to sports, because I had to end with sports. And so all of these are stories about how we assume that certain things aren't really work and should be done for love rather than for money, and how that story has crept into all of these different types of work that I would imagine that many of us on this call do. As a journalist, it certainly affects me. So when I'm talking about like healthcare and teaching being assumed to be women's work that is persistently low paid and the worker is expected to show up and sacrifice themselves in the middle of a pandemic, to video game programmers who practically sleep on the job, eat multiple meals there, and spend all of their time working out of devotion to the creation of great games, That's, it's a story that encompasses a lot of different kinds of work. So I asked Ray and Kate to join me because they are in some ways the people whose stories anchor the book. Ray begins the whole book and Kate begins the second half of the book. And I also find it really interesting that I talked to Ray about being a mother, but she is also an artist, and Kate's work involves a lot of caring labor. So I am going to let them both talk about themselves before I start asking them questions. So Ray, do you want to start?
Sure. So hi, my name is Ray Malone, and I'm a theatre maker and a creative producer and a photographer. And I'm also an activist. I'm in the book. Partly because, or mostly because of the Fallout Club. And the Fallout Club was a group I created a few years ago in response to my experience being a single mother and being on benefits. And the Fallout Club provides creative and consciousness raising groups for single and low income parents. But to give you a bit of a backstory, which should hopefully explain how my activism, my creativity and my motherhood is all kind of connected and informs my practice, I'll go back 6 years. So 6 years ago, in January, I discovered I was pregnant and I had endometriosis on the same day. It was quite a dramatic day. But at the time, I was creating a UKIP themed swing dance with a drag king friend of mine. We created this 10-minute little sketch. It was very grotesque. It was poking fun at Nigel Farage's brand of racist nationalism. It was also kind of poking fun at that kind of keep calm and carry on kind of nostalgia that was popular at the time. So we created this, it was like a 10-minute little dance comedy routine. We had purple and yellow costumes. I had this amazing wig, which looked like the Frankenstein's bride with big victory rolls with pound coins in it. And we looked great. And in the process of doing that, we became involved with something called the Beyond UKIP Cabaret of Diversity that was organised by ACT UP London. And that was a really big cabaret. So anybody who UKIP offended or that UKIP decided that they didn't like, we invited them into the cabaret. So we had Romanians, we had European language lessons, we had breastfeeding mothers, we had all sorts of groups. And then we took the cabaret down to Nigel Farage's local pub in Kent. And we put on the cabaret in the pub. And then after the cabaret, we were congering outside the pub, singing We Are Family. And Farage turned up and came out, called us all scum, got in his car and phoned the BBC and said we chased his kids. Now, for the record, nobody chased any children. So, but the right-wing press don't fact check. So by the time we got back into town, we were all over the press calling us scum. And then a week later, we were having a debrief in a community centre in East London. And Britain First turned up and locked us in a room. Now, I was 4 months pregnant at the time, and I remember I was absolutely fine. I was taken care of by this big group of activists. But I remember being very conscious that I was vulnerable as a pregnant woman with, the far right banging on the door. And also just aware of the tropes that were being bandied around of a good mother and a bad mother. But I was fine. My mother wasn't very happy about it, but it was all okay. Not to be deterred, I carried on throughout my pregnancy, singing songs about the rise of the far right in Europe with a singer called Johnny Abrams. And then because of the London rent prices, I decided to move up to Yorkshire, and my daughter was born in Sheffield. Me and my partner split up. I then spent 2 years in the north unsuccessfully trying to find work, and then came back to London just before my daughter was 2 and directed The Tempest, an all-female Tempest with a group called Sea Change. But during that time, I was living in a bedsit with my daughter, who was nearly 2, and it was a nightmare. That didn't work out, so I started house sitting for friends, and then I had a whole period of very insecure accommodation, and it was a nightmare. And on the back of that, I created the Fallout Club. And I got together with a group of other mums, and we decided to put on consciousness raising groups and discussions about universal basic income and look at the economic struggles of motherhood. And we called it the Fallout Club because it was about the breakdown of the nuclear family. And also because I was interested in this 19th century trope of the fallen woman as a way to describe promiscuous women and single mothers. So in the process of that, I also met an amazing embroidery artist called Milu Stella, who I'd gone along to her like introduction to embroidery class. And I wanted to embroider my daughter's first swear word, which was bollocks, into one of her dresses, or not her dresses that she wore, like one of her old dresses. And me and Milu hit it off, and she happened to be raised by a single mother. So we just carried on talking, and we created more a workshop where we got a Wendy house, and we called it the Basic Income House. And we talked to our participants about what do mothers need to survive and what do mothers need to thrive. And then, we did a few of those. And then since the pandemic, when the pandemic started, my theatre company, Heads, Bodies, Legs, was commissioned to run an arts and a heritage project called the Molly's Masquerade, which looks at 18th century Molly houses. And by Molly, I mean queer men, working class women, and sex workers. And so for the past year, I've been running Zoom workshops looking at that history. And then Sarah put me in a book, and now I'm here talking to you.
And we loved having you in the book. Thank you, Ray. So Kate, I'll ask you to introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you, Ray. Your work is so good. So my name is Kate. I'm coming to you from a mountain in the south of Ireland. I'm an artist with a social practice, which includes printmaking, building social spaces, collective cooking, and publishing. Everything I do is with other people. The spaces we create look to build alternatives to the social relations of capitalism. For me, it's not about a particular moment in the future, it's about process. It's the care that is put into the relationships and radical friendships that are the basis of the worlds we are building. What I aim to do blurs the false divisions between our internal world and external world. So the despair and hope that exists within us is intrinsically linked to the despair and hope of dismantling the violent systems in which we live. Now, as I burn out, as those around me burn out, as communities burn out, as streets burn out, as our planet burns out, there has to be another way of us being together, of doing things where we look after ourselves, where self-care and collective care are intrinsically linked. I do not speak of an idea of self-care that has been commodified, promoting an individual disconnected from our common struggles. I speak of an understanding that the transformation of our world requires the transformation of ourselves. Writer Yvonne O'Ehare describes what needs to be done as an examination of conscience, both individual, societal, and cultural. She also sees the potential of using art to collectively tell a story for the possibility of the world that is dreamt. I speak of our internal world as, for me, the fact that we internalize capitalism from such a young age has led to such myths that Sarah reveals in her book as being hardwired within us. Therefore, the process of deconstructing 5 centuries of dominant narratives, which Achille Mbembe said at a talk I was at the weekend, serves to trample on the dignity of the weak, is as much a process of deconstructing our internal stories as well as those stories delivered to us from the top in our external world. Something Mbembe speaks of in terms of the Imperial Archive. At the same talk, Yvonne O'Ehare delivered the best description of a culture that is built on theft and stolen land as a culture that is built on complete bullshit. Or, as Ray's daughter would say, bollocks. There isn't always language for the new worlds we are creating. That's why arts practice for me is crucial in how I organize. Whether it's print, radio, or cooking, it's about the relationships that are built in the process. For a long time, especially in political spaces, I didn't really voice my opinions as I thought, oh, it'll come across too utopian, too idealistic. She's a dreamer, a hopeless romantic. Now I no longer care. If this world has to be turned upside down, then just maybe it makes more sense to imagine and build an infrastructure built on the praxis of existing and past struggles around the world and the care of the relationships within this process, rather than whether one is an anarchist, a commoner, or a Marxist. As the wheels of the neoliberal machine plow on in resistance to a system that does not care and will never care, if we have anything, it's the ability to be honest with each other, and that honesty builds the best relationships with the darkest sense of humor. We must collectively create alternative social imaginaries, and these must be the spaces from which we work, space for a future vision alongside a critical analysis of the global system which perpetuates itself. In the turning of the world upside down, value is at its core. What do we value? If care work has never been valued, then the chances of us valuing care within how we work is pretty slim. So where are the alternative narratives? We need alternative platforms of communication. How does grassroots organizing begin to control the printing presses? Currently, I am working with Common Ground, an arts organization in Dublin 8. Dublin 8 is an area in Dublin that for me has been crucial in understanding what a revolutionary intersection of art and activism for over 30 years can really look like. As one of my mentors in Dublin 8, Rita Fagan, would say, it is art by the community, not community art. Currently, I am working on building a platform for radio, print, and film. I am doing nothing new. I am interested in learning from what has been built for a very long time and connecting these stories and sharing their value nationally and internationally. My other mentor, John Bissett, who wrote the book, Regeneration, Public Good or Private Property, always asks the question, who is this for? We all know the story, often described as poor people on rich land, as areas of our cities that once took no place of priority within the state and private interests inevitably become sites of hyper-gentrification, and a systematic strategic process of displacing people unfolds, which has been planned for many years with encoded documents that are meant to never be read by those that they will affect. So the common story is our common struggle. This is why the Just City Collective, How Much Is Enough, is an international network. So it took me a long time to meet people where I could be like, so are you up for the revolution too? And that connection of really believing in alternatives and yes, being aware of the deep systemic structural violence that is embedded in every corner of our social and political structures, but at the same time, believing because we know it is possible as it is happening in small and big ways around the world. Such a process of turning things upside down reflects what Mbembe would describe as turning the imperial archive against itself. Archiving, publishing, radio, film, all these mediums are always going to be really important for building critical mass. It's a long, slow process, but we desperately need alternative platforms and structures, and lots of these can be built by joining together all the existing small and large-scale alternative ways of organizing that exist all around us. Finally, what gets me excited has always been talking about the revolution, which takes many forms. What gets me excited is the collective energy that happens around struggles for a different world. Learning about people around the world fighting and winning, alternatives to capitalism exist everywhere. Of course, we are socialized to believe that there is no alternative. Thank you.
So, yeah, I want to just start off because I obviously start the book with the work of care for a reason, asking you both to talk a little bit more about the role of care in your lives, both sort of personal and in your creative work. I don't know, either of you has any preferences on jumping in first, or if I should just be annoying and call.
Go for it, Ray.
I guess one of the parts of your book that I really love is that quote that you've got of, I don't know if it's you who said this, that we need love, but we also need a fucking game plan. That's like, I'm going to pin that up on my wall because I absolutely love it.
It was actually on a tote bag from an art and feminism collective here in New York.
Okay, because that kind of just is all that I need to say, really. I guess that I suppose I've been thinking about it since we've been delivering the mollies, because it started in pandemic, that everything that we planned to do, we couldn't do. So we couldn't do the choir, we couldn't do costume making, we couldn't do anything practical. So we were suddenly in this responsive situation going, what can we deliver the community? And so we were like puppetry, poetry, stuff that we could do online. But then we were also going, well, what does everybody want and what do they need? And the most popular thing that we're delivering at the moment is voguing. Everybody wants to vogue, and we need exercise, and we need that. We need a lot of color and poetry and connection in our lives right now. But what worries me is also the narrative around self-care, that there's I worry that the arts is going to become a sticking plaster for social problems. And actually a lot of our struggles of the people that within our communities are dealing with homelessness right now and losing their jobs and being in incredibly precarious positions. And the gratitude diary is just not going to cut that. And so as much as, the community arts definitely need more funding right now, I'm concerned that, we're going to be used as a sticking plaster.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I too have about lost it with gratitude practice. I think I'm stealing this from organizer Jane McAlevey, who's always like, I think we should be less grateful. I would like to encourage more complaining. Okay.
Yeah, I actually a friend who's a really, really lovely friend gave me a feminist diary for a birthday present. And I was like, oh, thanks. And it's all like, every page is like self-care and gratitude. And I'm like, thank. But where is the point that, I think the point of the organizing is like gathering people together and being like, what are your issues? And where do we connect on this? And how do we hold the government to account for the insane amount of corruption that's happened in the past year? One of the workshops that we did that I talked about to do with the basic income house, we took that to, I think it's mentioned in the book as well, that we took it to the Quaker community. And there actually weren't any single mothers there, but there was actually a lot of elderly people and a lot of disabled people. And we found that a lot of the issues overlapped. The benefits cap affects a lot of people. And so although I was talking about my issues as a single mother, when we asked people about a basic income, we said, if we gave you an extra £1,000 a month, what would you do with it? And they were saying things that they couldn't chop their own food, that they couldn't get out of the house, that a number of other issues that I think is really essential now for, solidarity and sort of connections with our struggles.
Yeah, I think that's all really interesting. I think, for me, in a way, I always feel like I'm always trying to reclaim words. But I think the arts will always be everything will be co-opted by capitalism. So we have to resist and bring things back. So there's of course, there's going to be the art washing that is going to happen, but it's up to us to actually, if we have a proper intersection of art as a platform for organizing and the building of social relations that can last as opposed to burnout. And I think in terms of self-care, I resisted it forever. I fucking hated the word. And now through 6 burnouts later, I'm like, okay, it actually has to be something within activism, but we have to reclaim it. It's not, the spend €100 on yoga pants, self-care. It's like, we need to, it needs to be connected with the collective thing. So I think I've had to address that within the groups, I guess, because I'm working with, amazing organizers and community workers and activists. And I just noticed that the more the years go on, the quicker we're burning out. So I think it's obviously, a combo.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think particularly right now when mothers and carers and so many of us, that every part of our existence is engendered in the care of others, that yet going to listen to 10 minutes of meditation is really necessary. And, you know, all those eating well, moving, being able to carve out a little bit of time for yourself is so important. But that also speaks about the injustice of what we're dealing with at the moment as well.
Yeah.
And so we've got to make, like you say, like we've got to make activism a really integrated part of self-care, because otherwise it's just pampering.
Yeah, and I think that's something I'm working with an amazing activist called Creanie in Athens, who she's had to come in to like train us in sustainable organizing. And it is that idea of, it can't just be when we burn out, you know, that it has to be like just a daily thing that is put into the housing organizing that we're doing. And which I guess is, yeah, it's just embedding it, not that it's like, let's just forget everything and go to a spa, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to think of things that are community care, right? I mean, I'm living alone right now, right? And I'm my entire world is this little desk right here. I just kind of sit in the corner of this bedroom. And so it really magnifies the way that I rely on people that right now I can't see. You know, that I can see them on a video screen. Some of you are in the audience right now, but like, that's not enough. And in fact, right now, when like so much of my job is staring at a video screen, that's like the last thing I want. And I can't have the thing that I really want, which is like, somebody come over and give me a hug, please. Not allowed, can't do it. So it's really sort of highlighted for me the ways that like self-care is just absolutely inadequate in this moment. But also the ways that like and the discourse is driving me somewhat bonkers. If anybody follows me on Twitter, you'll have seen me like ranting about the way we've been talking about teachers, particularly in the US right now. There's just like this drumbeat of like posh media pundits yelling that all the teachers need to get back into the classroom stat, and the teachers unions are the problem, and how dare those teachers not want to go back into school because, you know, kids don't get COVID or something, which is not actually true. And, you know, the way that it's now being framed is sort of like, well, mothers are stressed, so we have to make the teachers go back to school. And it's like, okay, 76% of teachers in the US where I am, I don't know what the percentages are in the UK and Ireland, but 76% of teachers are women. That means a whole lot of teachers are also moms. The idea that you can pit these kinds of carers against each other just shows that we actually don't value care at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to move a little bit into the question of work and sort of paid work, which I remember in conversations with both of you at some point, I remember each of you sort of talking about the question of like, could art be a real job? Could this be a thing, a way that I feed my kid, a way that I feed myself, a way that I make this sustainable? I remember Kate telling me about the decision to go to architecture school because you didn't think that art could be a real job. And Ray talking about, you know, having gone to school for the arts and then going, can I keep doing this? Can I justify keeping doing this while I'm now responsible for a child? So I wanted to talk about the way we think that we don't think of the arts as work that ought to be paid, and what how this sets us up for this kind of ongoing struggle about doing the arts.
Yeah, I think it starts so young. Like my nephew yesterday was asking me about the book because he was looking at it, and he was like, why do you get paid to do art? You know, so like that's at like age 5. But yeah, in terms of that's, I think how we internalize it so young, I find fascinating, because I made the decision to become an architect at 14 based on the fact that it sounded good and was really socially acceptable, whereas being an artist wasn't. And then, you know, and then it's all that, like, then you go to somewhere like architecture college and then it's just an absolute disaster. But yeah, so from every moment when something isn't valued, then you're not going to see it as a real. So it took me a very long time to see it as an option, and then also as it takes a very long time to value that you should be paid for what you do, because it's, you know, you're so lucky to get to do what the thing that you love. Yeah, it's embedded deeply in our psyche. And it's actually the people that I work with and work for that have made me like actually get paid properly, because I had such like a terrible mental attitude towards it. Yeah, what do you think, Ray?
I completely agree. I think, yeah, the arts are so precarious to the point of poverty and so many of us are just so afraid that we're not going to be able to do it. So when the opportunity comes, we all burn out. And we work to the point of complete exhaustion because we don't know if we're going to be given that opportunity again, that we have to prove ourselves so much that we've been allowed to do it, that we've been given some money and somebody has given us permission to make work. And that's also really silencing as well, when art is intrinsically very political, but to be in this state of fear when you're creating, there's no, I think we'd spoken before about Winnicott, the child psychologist, and boundaries and security, and about, like, Winnicott's famous, isn't he, for attachment theory and for the good enough mother, but also about theories to do with boundaries and space. And so, for example, when a mother has a baby, like traditionally, the father would create a space where the mother can devote herself to the child and the child's needs. And as your child grows, you also provide a space and secure boundaries for your child to experiment and play and be free and develop. And we also need that as artists. We need space and we need security. We need to be able to be spontaneous and we need to be able to experiment, and then we need to be able to fail sometimes and things not work out. And without that, we can't do our jobs. We can't play. So that's one of the things I often think about when I directed The Tempest, when Nola was 1 and then when she was 2, and that I was homeless, that I had no idea how I was expected to, you know, sort of support those actors, think about Shakespeare, putting on a show, when I was so concerned about how my daughter was dealing without me for the day and where we were going to live and what was I going to do in the career and why was I theatre directing anyway, and I wouldn't be able to support myself. And so, you know, we can't do that without some sort of security. And I think we're failing mothers and we're failing artists without providing this.
Yeah, we've also talked about the way the way the arts are funded, or most often not funded, means that working class people get shut out of the arts. And so I wondered, both of you can probably talk for a while about this. What does it do to the so-called art world when there are so few working class voices in it?
Yeah, well, it's a massive problem. If it's not valued and then people aren't being paid, then the access of people actually being artists and being in the room is really limited. So therefore the narrative and the people that are speaking is completely limited. So therefore the stories are often told for other people. And I guess the intrinsic ability for arts to be political is probably the potential why the system doesn't want certain people to tell their stories. And I think it's all very connected. So, you know, if the arts was valued and then if people were paid right, then you would have more working class voices, you would have people who are constantly marginalized. But at the moment, that's not possible when it's so precarious. Like, I got through art college plus a lot of my life on welfare in Ireland. But I know from working with people in the States, like if I was in the States, that never would have been an option to become an artist because of paying college fees and all those things. So I think it's, yeah, Ray, you've even more stories.
Yeah. Yeah. There's absolutely that, you know, like, whose stories are we telling? Who has the right to tell those stories? I mean, we could talk about class as well, and we can talk about queer communities as well. you know, like whose history are we looking at? Which viewpoint are we considering people's stories? I always think about Fleabag when you talk about like class. I'm like, yeah, do you know what I mean? Like this woman who can afford to run a guinea pig cafe, and you know, when she hasn't got the rent that she can turn around to daddy because he's got her a cafe rather than getting her therapy. Like, I'm just like, what planet are we on? But I think partly also, I live in London and there are plenty of people who, you know, live off the bank of mum and dad. And in a way, it kind of makes you want to, you know, it gives you more kind of motivation to be part of that world that you kind of feel excluded from, or you feel that there's a lot of barriers to. I mean, like a big part of, before I studied my master's, I was a TEFL teacher, and I was also a governess, so like a glorified nanny for super rich. And I spent quite a number of years doing that, like trying to make plays in my part-time, but ultimately that was the money job. And right now, I think that also motivated me, because I remember like at one time, one of my bosses being like, oh, butlers are really popular at the moment. He was Russian. And he was like, do people have them in England? And I was like, well, I've never seen one, but like, but I mean, it's so ridiculous. And, you know, in a way, like being an English governess, I was a status symbol, that they took me around and they took me to art galleries and they were like, oh, meet our English governess. But it was actually the nannies who were usually from Georgia, or from when I worked for a family from Abu Dhabi, and they had like loads of nannies from East Asia, and those nannies would like show me pictures of their kids and be like, they miss me so much, and they say that I love these kids more than I love them. And the situation I found so extreme that that's one of my biggest motivations was coming back, and I was like, I don't want to leave the arts in these people's hands. I don't want this to be the only stories. That is the only stories that get told. Yeah.
The oh my goodness, talking about the nannies, talking about their kids at home, and like the Harley Russell Hochschild calls it like the care chain, right? That it's outsourced, and you're sort of outsourcing care onto these people. So instead of the job sort of packing up and going to the, you know, the country, the workers are coming from there, but leaving their own family behind and coming to do the work paid for somebody else's kids. And that's, well, I have a whole chapter in the book on that subject. It is a little bit relevant for me.
I think it's also really interesting to kind of really articulate what care is. Like, you know, from working for families where so much is outsourced, you know, the cleaning, the cooking, the teaching, that actually, and for women who work in kind of very professional jobs, when they have a nanny, it doesn't mean that they're not mothers. Do you know what I mean? And you can see that they're spending more of their time caring for their children, but the care can come in play or activities. And sometimes I'm like, my house is a mess. Like, that doesn't mean I'm not caring for my child. Like, care doesn't necessarily mean cleaner. And I think, yeah, we need to be very clear on this. I think like a piece that I saw at a Mothers Who Make group from somebody called Rachel Spencer a while ago, she did a piece where she just listed all the jobs in her house. And it was actually a piece more about the division of labour in a home between her and her husband. And it was all the jobs, like who thinks about when the kids have outgrown their clothes? Who thinks about what shoe size the children are? All those little things that, you know, the emotional labour of all that. I think we need to be really clear about it. Because I think it's also part of the undervaluing of motherhood, you know, that so many women I know were so desperate to get back to work when our children were small and babies, because we were so worried about being out of the workforce for so long or not being able to get back into the arts, but also because there's just a general undervaluing of the role of mothers. And some of it's boring. some of these, do you know what I mean? You're stuck in the house. I think everybody kind of relates to that right now at the moment. Like this domestic solitude, well, all you got to do is like clean and rearrange and whatever, if you're lucky. Or maybe you're teaching several lessons and yeah.
It's so interesting right now, right? Because like we are all sort of stuck in the home. I was noting that the acronym for work from home, that everybody started doing WFH. And of course, I've been doing the research that I've been doing for this book for the last however long. So I see WFH and I think wages for housework. That's the first thing that comes to my mind because I've been reading Selma James and I've been reading Sylvia Federici and I've been reading Kathy Weeks. And then people are like, oh no, it's work from home. And I was like, oh, but work from home should also remind us all that we need wages for housework. Because we're all getting the experience of being home all day. And like, yeah, I desperately need to clean the kitchen. I am in a borrowed house at the moment too. So I feel extra like I have to like do much more cleaning because it's not mine. Whereas whatever. But in talking about the sort of class barriers to the arts, like it's also true in a variety of industries. Like I'm a journalist, and people often ask me like how I got started writing about work. And the answer is I had a lot of shitty jobs. And so I was very aware that work was political because I had a lot of bosses who treated me like garbage. And I had a lot of jobs waiting tables where I only made tips. Yes, I'm in America. So we have this thing called the tipped minimum wage, where if you are in a job that gets tipped, you can get paid by your boss below the actual minimum wage. And the tipped minimum wage is $2.13 an hour, and it has not changed in over 20 years. So America, we're doing great. But yeah, the fact that there were not that many people when I started journalism that wanted to write about work is because now it's become an industry that relies on multiple unpaid internships and an Ivy League degree and a graduate degree and living in New York City or London, where it's next to impossible to live on an entry-level salary. So either you go further into debt, which is what I did, or you rely on, again, the bank of mom and dad. And what does that do when journalism is biased heavily in favor of the bank of mom and dad? It means that the people who are writing about the workplace don't have that much experience in it outside of the journalism job, which is a job. So we end up, again, this narrative about the arts creeps, right? It doesn't just stay in like doing fine art, doing theater. It ends up in all of these other kinds of work that we might not think about in the same way. So I noticed a few people in the chat commenting on my William Morris blazer. Yes, it is. And yes, I did that on purpose because I cannot be talking about art and labor without talking about William Morris. And I particularly love sort of Morris's sort of three things that make work good, right? Which was the hope of rest, the hope of product, so the hope of being able to keep or at least share in the value of the thing you produce, and the hope of pleasure in the work itself. And, so rest is, hi, we need time off from work. We need to not be working all of the time, a thing I would like to take a break from right now. The hope of product is a really interesting question about work beyond the arts, right? Do I have control over my book? I have more control over a book than I do over many other things I might do, but I still don't actually really control this thing at the end of the day. My publishers still have a lot to say about what it's going to look like when it goes out. And hope of pleasure in the work itself, a lot of that has to do with working conditions. People have asked me, when I got out of waitressing and retail work and became a journalist, if like everything has been better. And it's like, no, I had jobs in the restaurant industry that were great, that my managers treated us all well and everybody was my friend. I worked at one restaurant on a summer between university semesters, and they gave me like a going away party when I left at the end of 3 months and like bought me wine glasses to take home with me. That was lovely. That was a great job. And I've had journalism jobs that are god awful abusive. So I think, often when we think about the lovable jobs, we think about the industry or the category, right? I want to be an artist. I want to be a writer. I want to be a teacher. I want to be whatever. And you don't think about how much the pleasure in the job itself is affected by how much control your boss has over you. And so I'm winding around to a question here, which is that I think one of the big appeals of the arts is often that you don't really have a boss. And I wonder how much that has played into any of both of your life decisions and what role the idea of controlling your own work has played for you. Kate, you're off mute, so you go first.
Okay, I got distracted. I was reading Eleanor and Meg's comments in the chat, which are actually really good, because I think, especially in relation to the arts, in just before I answer the question, just about like, because there's such a lack of class analysis within the arts in Ireland, and obviously everywhere. So I know I mentioned about getting social welfare, but obviously that is the class then is completely a barrier. Even if people do get social welfare, it's still not, accessible to go to our college, and then your connections and all that. And then that means that all those voices are excluded from, as Meg says, policy curating and everything else. So just wanted to say good points from the chat. In terms of being the boss, yeah, like I definitely bought into that whole thing. And to be fair, I can't actually work for other people, so I hadn't really any choice. And I'm actually really bad at any jobs that I had that I didn't care about. I wasn't very good at them. And so, yeah, I think I'm really, really bad at managing myself. So that's the biggest thing that I'm having to learn. Is in what's interesting for me within social arts practice and activists and organizers is how, through like looking at alternatives to capitalism, we really like treat ourselves like we're dirty capitalist bosses, So we really just like treat ourselves like complete machines. So like that's my biggest challenge. Ray?
Yeah, I guess I've had jobs where I've had bosses that I've been happy in. Like I was saying to you, wasn't I? When I was younger, I went to secondary school in Cornwall, and all our first jobs were in seaside resorts, in hotels. And I was a waitress and a chambermaid, and we used to have a right laugh. It was really fun because, and it was very clear. We knew how much we were getting paid. We were all living at home with our parents most of the time. So we didn't really have many outgoings, but the friendships that you forge within those environments were the richest thing about it. And I think the communal engagement of why people work is a really big part of it. Whereas I think, as much as I love the projects that I've been involved with and everybody that I've worked with, particularly in theatre, I think theatre, when I was struggling with Nola and with my daughter, that theatre company was very much like a family to me, and, gave me somewhere to live and have supported me. And I continue to see them all at Christmas, and, it's like they've become like family. But something I was thinking about the other day, because I was reading Mother's Who Make group, and lots of women feeling overwhelmed, lots of people putting in Arts Council grants for develop your creative practice. And I feel like sometimes the freedom can be overwhelming. And that kind of ties into how much we sacrifice for ourselves and how exhausting it could be, because the stakes are so high of what we want to achieve. And actually, in a similar situation, when you have boundaries and you have a bit of security, it's comfortable. Whereas when you have complete freedom, you also have freedom to fail as well, and not being able to support yourself. And so I think we do need a lot more. We need a lot, don't we? We need a basic income. We need something where people can just be like, I'm okay, I can feed myself, or I can feed my children, and then I can think. Because right now it's just, I think there's too much fear in poverty, or not being able to, do what we want to do.
I wanted to ask another question, but then I saw somebody noting that they worked in the charity sector, and oh yes, I have a whole chapter in the book on that, because it is also a place where you are expected to love your job, love the cause, love the people you're helping if you are helping people directly, and put yourself absolutely dead last, and it is terrible. I have also done that. And and somebody else noting the violence against women sector. Yeah, it's right. You are just, you're supposed to be able to do it for the cause. And this is another area where the history that I wound up tracing for the book is actually that a lot of these things started as things that well-off women would do who were not allowed to have real jobs. And so their sort of way of getting out of the house was to do charity work. And that still shapes the expectations of the sector, including the ongoing expectation that women somehow don't need to be paid. Anyway, the question I wanted to ask the both of you next, however, is a little bit different, which is about sort of pandemic life a little bit, because both of you, the art practice and organizing practices that you have a lot to do with space and bringing people together in a space. And while getting a little meta here, because we're all not in the same space and we're all in multiple different countries, and I don't know how many countries we have represented in the audience, but maybe you could tell us in the chat. How have you been thinking about sort of particularly like political organizing, but also creative spaces and organizing? Ray, you talked about this a little bit already, since we've all been on lockdown.
Yeah. Do you want to go, Ray, or will I?
Think about that one.
Well, I think about this all the time. I think Lisa Crown is in the chat there from A4 Sounds. I guess I'm working with a lot of different spaces at the moment, and kind of figuring out what is important, what actually matters, and what do we need. A lot at the moment is figuring out different ways of getting people connected in some way so that they don't have breakdowns. That's a big thing. For me, it's what's interesting has been there's been a lot of organizing that's happened. So every week, especially like we're within Dublin 8, I have multiple groups, whether it's with the Family Resource Centre or drug teams or housing related stuff. And there's a lot of, what's interesting is that has become the space. And because it's social arts practice, talking to people is my practice. So I think that's it. It is obviously my whole life before that was based on the physical spaces. But I guess what it did do is transform how I think about how our internal worlds are linked to it. And then I guess with studios like A4 Sounds or Sample Studios, it's also figuring out, okay, what are these spaces next? What do we do now, and what do we need in the world that we're going to enter? But I think for me, it's always about relationships. So it's been figuring out how to care for people and build these relationships this way. Obviously, it's really sad in lots of ways because not everyone can be in this space. And also, it's like just terrible for anxiety being online all the time. And then when you finish work, you can't talk to your friends or you can't talk to other people because they're also through your computer screen. So now I just look at the fire and listen to Christian Moore.
I guess I'm in a similar vein that I've usually done smaller workshops or been in theatre. You're in one space. And I think it is quite exciting. Like, it's exciting that we're talking to each other in different countries. And the same with the Molly is that we're a little we're based in a East London community centre, and we had people last week from Hungary, Hebden Bridge, Margate. Hungary was the most international we've got so far. But, that's really exciting. And I think it's also, we've had a lot of people who've been really grateful, who've been like, I'm disabled, I wouldn't normally have been able to attend. I wouldn't be able, London's a bit of a nightmare to travel around, and been like, I wouldn't be able to get to Bethnal Green. I'm here. So that's really great in the fact that it's given that opportunity for us to connect with people around the country. I think that we've had a lot of problems with the elderly audience being like, couldn't work Zoom. I mean, I never talk to my mum on Zoom. My mum hasn't got Zoom. Do you know what I mean? And like, if we're lucky, we can talk to each other on Facebook video. But, they're not always great with that. And so one kind of suggestion is to kind of go, what form of communication might suit your audience? And if your audience is elderly, then the chances are it might be the phone. And, the phone can be just as intimate to your project as seeing people. Or maybe, and letter writing. And we're doing like a smutty letter writing workshop at the moment with the wonderful Rosie Pendle baby. And, that's part of it. It's like lovely to receive post. People like really like post. It's amazing. And I really like postcards. So yeah, I think that probably we can engage with all the other forms of communication as well. So yeah.
Awesome. All right, so we've got some questions coming in. So I'm going to take some of these because I have one more for you, but I'm going to ask it at the end because I'm in charge and I can do that. So our first question here is, how do we conceptualize leisure as a component of life? And what does leisure mean to you? And I'm going to make one of you answer that first while I think about what I'm actually going to say about it. Anybody? All right, fine. Then I'll say something about it.
Good question. Go for it, Sarah.
Kate was just saying that I think I already said once is like the thing that's making me feel bonkers lately is that like everything feels like work now because like I'm on this thing all day and like these are my friends. They are also in my book. I am not good at boundaries anyway. But yeah, at the end of the day, when I've been on Zoom calls all day, I miss human contact, but also like, I don't want to be on another damn Zoom call, even though like there are people who are across an ocean from me that I really, really miss. And I love seeing your face and like interacting, but it's also just like everything feels like work. And so it's very hard to find anything that really feels like leisure time. I end up reading more books, which is great, but also a lot of that still feels like work. And I'm sort of rushing myself to get through this book so I can get to the next book. So I can like read more books and be productive in lockdown. And so I'm just like, I want a vacation when this thing is over. I want to take like 5 of my favorite people and rent a house somewhere on a beach and not do a damn thing, but lie on a beach and like hug people for 2 weeks straight. Because it's really hard to draw the lines between work and leisure, particularly when we do things that we do enjoy, that are intellectually stimulating, that are sort of involving all of these different parts of our lives already. So yeah, I find it really hard actually to define, even as I wrote the book encouraging people to have more of it.
Yeah, exactly that. Everything that I like doing, I'm also doing online at the moment. Something I did enjoy doing is a friend of mine. We did a aerobics class in the morning while we were online. So, and it gave us kind of an extra motivation to do it. Because we were like, so that was one of the online things that I've done, which I liked. But I guess because I've got a young child, she's really easy to play with. And so when, we're not on screens, we can be playing with Lego or, just tickling her or just being in the moment and being with each other. But I'm the same as you, Sarah. Like I've got lots of Airbnbs that I want to go to. Just plans of like when we're together again by the beach, or I want to stay in a windmill. That's my thing. That's my plan for the summer. So yeah. Kate?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I can't lie because there's people I know here. It's like, oh, I take breaks. So yeah, I'm starting to have to schedule break time. I guess I've confused my work life because I think Paula Garrity has a really good question in there about the professionalization of everything. So it's like I've turned all my fun things into work, which I actually still do love. So now I'm trying to find things that are outside of it, but there isn't very much. So that's why I'm making dance videos at the moment. But other than that, I'm trying to actually, do things like walk and, I don't know, listen to music. But maybe that could lead to Paula's question, maybe. I don't know.
I'm on mute. Somebody commented about the nails. They're stickers because it's really hard to get good at anything when I can't go pay somebody to do it for me. So they're just like stick-on things. The professionalization of it is such an issue. There's a line somewhere in the book that I stole from Silvia Federici about that nothing so effectively stifles our desires as the transformation into work of the things we used to love, basically. And it's really true. I used to write for fun and now I can't because writing is always work.
It's also a really funny one in terms of labor, because I used, work in, whether it was like the woolly jumper shops or whatever I was working in, and then in the other time would do the organizing and the other work, and that would be free, and it wasn't work. But then you come to the question of labor, and then it's like, well, if you're going to do all that work for free, then you're fucking things up for everyone else, so then it becomes your work. And then so I don't know, and money does all often screw things up. So it's not something I have figured out, Paula.
Yeah, and we've actually got a semi-related question in the box too about the rise of influencing and influencers on the social media. I just learned this week that some influencers have unionized. They are joining like the Screen Actors Guild here in the US, and I'm really here for influencers unionizing. But yeah, the question is like, it's a source of income. Free platforms have allowed a lot of people to create and monetize, and it democratizes a lot of stuff about how you can distribute your work. But doesn't it also reinforce the power of big tech platforms? Yes. And is it real art if it's so ingrained in the system? That is a complicated question. I don't know if I can answer that last bit. But definitely, I sort of hate the way that like social media turns everything once again into work. Right. So like I started an Instagram to share photos of my dog, mostly when my dog was still around. I just posted a lot of pictures of my dog for the 5 friends of mine that I assumed were interested enough to want to follow pictures of my dog. And now I feel like it's another platform where I have to like update my book tour schedule and all of this stuff. And it's just like another thing that's part of my job. But I'm not an influencer. Nobody's paying me to promote products on Instagram.
You're an influencer, no?
Well, I mean, I'm not like a professional influencer. Like I'm not, I feel like the category of this is like, people who do like promoted posts. And
sorry.
Like, they're not going to, they're not going to be like, I have a lot of followers on the internet. I can join the social media union now, although we should. Unionize the social media work. Wages for Facebook, which is a wonderful campaign that actually exists. Wages for Facebook. I'm going to find that while one of you.
I was actually also looking, Sinead Carey was talking about, I think this is Sinead that I work with in Dublin 8, who is a big legend, but about, and this is what I think about a lot because of like community work and community development work where everyone is so overworked. And she's talking about the experience that trauma-informed care does not carry through to the care of staff. And I guess when I think of burnout and care, I think a lot of people in community development work. And I think that's my biggest interest is the people that are doing the caring who are being totally screwed over. Ray?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a big thing as well. We think about like community artists and we're like, that we're caring for those community members. and that we need to care for ourselves, and we need to think about, I think there needs to be a big discussion of like, what can people do to support their staff when they go back? You know, is it like providing free therapy? Is it like, how do you make sure that everybody's okay? Because so many people are not okay. And those rules of, you know, like, so many companies are like, well, they're self-employed. Do you know what I mean? We're not really their employer. We don't really owe them anything. And you're like, yeah, we do. Just on a human level, like, we know them and they rely on money, and we need to like check in on them, make sure they're all right. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot more. I mean, if you just, yeah, that we could do there. I also think like we should have a lot more integrated childcare. I think we should have, you know, that to be able to have a nursery space, where a big thing for me when my daughter was young was the not wanting to leave her for 8 hours in childcare, because I knew that she wouldn't cope with it very well, and that kids actually manage shorter times away. And if you had some there that's in your workplace that you could go between meetings to, like one of the best things that I attended was the Mother House, which was a woman called Diana Gravino, who's got a company called Procreate that created artistic studios with on-site childcare. And I had some theatre meetings there. And they employed a Montessori educator, which is what I tried to copy with the Fallout Club, because I thought it was really important to, like, I really value that actually while I'm doing stuff on Zoom, my daughter knows what I do. And she's like, oh, you get people to do dance classes and you get people to do this. And I think it's really important that kids get to see you in the workplace, but they don't have to, you don't have to spend a whole day away from them. And I integrated kind of childcare and working relationships, allowing you to kind of develop your practice and be around people and have those creative conversations while your kid's there are really important as well. Yeah, that's one of my, I could go on. There's a lot of things that I think we should be doing that we're not.
Childcare on every corner, I'm saying, so it's convenient for everyone. I
mean, so yeah, sometimes like the whole childcare thing, I think is sometimes that's the only way that the conversation goes, when they're like, how can we help mothers? Oh, we'll just give them more childcare. We'll give them free childcare, because, you know, it is ridiculously expensive in the UK. And there's so many people I know that can't work because they can't afford the childcare, or that they've had to change career because they can't afford the childcare. And that's insane. But sometimes it can become the only conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think we've got to be able to support all women in all their different choices, and not have to jump through hoops within the benefit system. You know, it might be that your kid's disabled and that you want to spend more time off, or you might not. You just might feel that your time is better used at home to caring for your children. And we have to make sure that all women are going to be supported in all their different choices. Because, yeah, it does matter sometimes when, like, sometimes the whole conversation can become this either or, like, you're at home or you're at work. Yeah.
Yeah. So another question also related to the things we've just been talking about is, do we feel that arts as a role is so devalued because we're obsessed with everything having some kind of ROI or metric? I personally want to stab the person who invented the metrics on like the online journalism, because it's the worst, because everything is measured by how many clicks you get and how many eyeballs and how many participants on the call and how many whatever. And it's terrible.
Yeah. And I think it's, you know, it's not just arts, it's across the board. It's like in youth work, you know, it's no longer the valuing of the process or the relationships. It's completely based on measuring outcomes. And that's all part of like the state trying to devalue that kind of work, you know. And then in terms of the arts, yeah, and I think maybe that there could be a shift within the work that I do. There's starting to be an understanding, moving away from butts and seats, obviously because there's no seats. So yeah, I think it's a massive problem if we're, you know, it's like you know, it's like this, Ireland is built on this false tourism industry, so it's all about, I don't know what they call it, bed nights. I know Limerick, that was always the thing, bed nights and numbers and stuff. Numbers and stuff, very profound. Ray?
Numbers. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I got nothing to add on this one.
Okay, so also related on this question, because you did this really well. You put these questions in like an order that I can just pull here. Celine asks about the commodified work of art and how, the artist's work is often only valued in the product that is created at the other end, which is also true of writing a book. As you get paid for the book, no matter how many hours you put into the damn thing. And if it doesn't sell, oops. Yeah, and right. So in thinking about how you can be an activist in the arts when the thing so often is still like a product that's being co-opted as another form of capital.
You want it, Ray?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm very much also a believer in, the benefits of process. And I think in the position that we're in at the moment, that the project that I'm delivering at the moment, because it's so much more focused on the community and community engagement, it's, as long as people are having a nice time, it doesn't really matter what they make. It's great when they do make something, but it's so much more about the experience of the making and the process of the making. And I thought also, just as a theatre maker generally, do you know what I mean, that we learn so much from the rehearsal process through the discussion and the
I want to refer the question to someone who's not here. Just thinking of, you met Kerry Guinan
Yes.
from Ireland in the book, who is also part of the artist union that's being set up, and everyone should join a union. And yeah, she speaks very well. Like, as I don't produce products or anything that sells, so I'm not the best at this. But she speaks very well about art and labor. I guess for me, the work always has to be really, really multi-layered. Making artwork isn't going to change the world, but a combination of lots and lots of different things will. So I think it's very important to be very critical of art's place within all of that. But I think if we can look towards building a very different way of how we see it.
One of the things that I really enjoyed learning about for the arts chapter of this book was, so I knew about the WPA, which was the Works Progress Administration during the Great Depression in the US. And I knew that they had paid a lot of famous artists to make paintings and photographs and all of these things, and do murals in the community. And I knew that part of the story, but I didn't know that they had also paid for community art centers to be built all around the country. So not only were they sort of creating jobs for artists by having them make art, some sort of, quasi-commodified art, but they were also paying artists to teach classes and to create spaces where the community could come and make art, whether or not it was going to be sold, whether or not it was a thing that anybody would, particularly consider very valuable. But it was important to have spaces where everybody could have access to not just look at, but also to make art. And I've been thinking about this so much in terms of, it does get back to the process rather than the product. And, leaving William Morris aside for a moment, the way we often think about these things ends up being like, oh, if I don't sell X number of books, then the 3 years of my life that it took to make this thing were not worth it. But that's a ridiculous way to think about it. But how do we get back to ways of valuing the processes of these things? I think is part of the way that we have to get to, or it's part of the way that we are going to find the answer to some of these questions. So we have a question about activism, which we have also all sort of referenced, is juggling that outside of paid work, outside of caring work, thinking of activism as another third shift after, if your paid job is the first shift and your caring obligations are your second shift. than where you bring activism in. Yeah. Anyone? We've burned you out on questions.
I think ideally you need to incorporate your activism into the work that you're making. That would be the ideal situation. But I think for a lot of us, we're not doing that. And I know within a lot of campaigns that, people are giving up their evenings when they're exhausted, they've been at work all day. But when it's something important and that we don't feel that we've got any other choice, will there's insane amount of corruption selling off our NHS or whatever, people will attend anything. And but I think if we can incorporate it, it's difficult for me to say because that's what I'm trying to do at the moment, is kind of incorporate consciousness raising into all our workshops and all our everything that I'm doing at the moment. But I've also seen a huge amount of burnout because there is no boundaries as well when it's something that you care about so much and you feel that there is so much at stake. And there is so much at stake right now. How do we fight for everything? Yeah. Where do we find the capability to do that?
And I think it is. Oh, sorry, Ray, were you?
No, carry on.
It is hard with, I think, doing it all online. Like, I think I was going to 4 housing struggle related things a week and ended up, last week doing Zooms from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And I was like, okay, this is really bad. But aside from that, I think this is probably the least split I've been between the 3 of them, because I've for the first time have a full-time residency in the work that I'm doing in Dublin 8, which does combine the stuff. So for me, it's actually having the space where I can combine them easier. But I'm still not doing it successfully at all.
For me, there's this interesting thing, which is obviously my journalism is political, but there will be times that I'll want to sort of be involved in something as a person. But then the best thing that I can do for the movement is usually to write about it, because I do have access to pretty platforms that are pretty big. I have a decent following that reads my work. So, the best thing I can do is usually not just be another sort of body in the room at the organizing meeting. The best thing I can do is usually write a story about the organizing. So it, in a weird way, feels like it's constantly sort of separating me from involvement in things, because then I sort of end up with the okay, well, if I'm going to write about this, then I should keep some journalistic distance from being involved in it. And if I'm going to be involved in it, then I can't write about it, but then it should be written about. And, so it becomes a very weird, decision and combination of things that I end up fiddling with the line on all the time. All right, I've got one more question from here, and then I'm going to ask you guys one big pain in the ass question to wrap up. And then, So an anonymous attendee asks, how do we come to the stage where we know enough is enough and walk away when so much of the career is based on the belief in the ideals and desire for transformative change, but people are too busy gatekeeping to maintain the status quo that they're happy with? So basically, how do you walk away from the labor of love? How do you know when it's time to walk away from the labor of love, when it no longer seems to be doing the thing, part of the struggle? I wish I could tell you the answer to that, because I would like it for myself.
I just got too excited by the question because the work that I'm doing is called How Much Is Enough? And I was like, yeah, enough is enough.
There you go.
Which, that's always my interest. What is the breaking point, whether it's capitalism or whether it's in our own heads as to when we leave something? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not even gonna try.
I don't know, because partly my activism around motherhood was, I can't walk away from my daughter. I'm not going to do that. it's funny because you've got this line in the book, haven't you, that work won't love you back, but people will. And I'm always like, well, yeah, nobody's going to love me more than my daughter, or vice versa. But I'm always, part of me's brain's always going, yeah, but some people won't. Some people are bastards. So, I'm like, part of me sometimes is a bit wary, particularly with motherhood, when we often associate it with something kind of overly romantic, because it's a bit like, the whole influencers thing. I think it puts a pressure on our relationships to be always rosy, and they're not. Like, actually, our relationships are hard work as well. Well, mine are. I don't know if yours are. But you have to put work into relationships as well. So yeah, I find I've totally gone off track, haven't I? But
No, but I think because for me it's just about relationships, so it's less. Yeah, I think, and actually, A4 Science has said, I think it is important to pick one thing and do it well, and build relationships with others doing other work instead of being involved in everything, which is actually a really good point, because I think that's what I've had to come to. It's like, okay, well, we can't all do everything. So it's like, that's why we need the army, which we talk about in the book. It's like, okay, this person is really in the housing union, getting that shit sorted. The other person's in the artists union. We're doing the social arts practice. This other person is really critiquing community development, And I think it's through our relationships and buildings of networks that for me becomes manageable, because otherwise it's just, you just feel like you're not going to get anywhere. So it has to be about other people.
Yeah. All right. So I want to wrap up by asking a question about whether it is possible for capitalism to actually fund care and art, or would that actually just break the system?
Yes, I think it absolutely is. I think, do you know what I mean? That we look at the, particularly right now, I think, I've been very interested in the whole Marcus Rashford, Rashford campaigns. Yeah. Partly the fact that it took a footballer for everybody to be taking this stuff seriously, but that I've noticed that he's got behind what would be the benefit if we remove the housing cap, that 156,000 children will be lifted out of poverty. And I think at the moment, like, COVID is really revealing how much women are, filling in all the cracks of the system at the moment. So, for instance, I know a woman who was caring for a relative, a second cousin, a young woman who found out she was pregnant quite late into her pregnancy. Social services were involved because she was on drugs. She was very young. And my friend was asked to step in and become a foster mother, because they said social services can't provide it at the moment. I was watching my friend, like, supporting so many people within the system. And I think, she both had two of her own children, she had a husband, she had COVID deaths in the family, she had just the amount of people that she was actually supporting and caring for was just insane. And the effect of the fact of the benefit cuts and austerity and, all the closures of children's centres has had such a devastating effect. And that costs money. It costs money to provide social services. It costs money to provide foster care, to remove children, to remove babies. And I think that the money that we invest in people and in supporting people and supporting carers, we're going to see that be removed elsewhere. We'll see that in, sort of the NHS and, the bills for mental health services, that we need to give all those largely women, nurses, carers, mothers, sex workers, an income so that they're not struggling so much. And I think we will see the benefit. I think we will reap the benefit, and it won't be, it won't cost so much. But I mean, I think it's also a bit crap when it all comes down to GDP, because there's a moral cost to it as well, that we have to do this. So yeah.
So hard. Yeah, I think it'll always come down to how how strong we are and how well we're organizing collectively. Like, of course, like I said before, there would be attempt for everything to be co-opted, but at the same time, we have to take money from certain places, and it's weighing up, what is the value and what are we doing with it? Are we redistributing that wealth to other people? And how are we? So like, it's going to be, it's like I said, it's like the art alone isn't going to change things. It's the combination of lots of different things. And obviously I don't really know the answer.
Spoiler alert, I think the answer is no. I think would have to toss everything out the window and start over. However, we could probably at least do things a little bit better along the way by the time.
In the meantime, before
But yeah, I mean, somebody in the comment says, shouldn't we better focus on building an economic system in a society that is built on care and arts? And I said, that sounds great.
That's it.
I'm in.
That's the perfect way to
I'm in. Thank you all. It is time to wrap up. Have been on so many Zooms. You all have been lovely. Thank you, Ray and Kate, for helping me make this book. And thank you to everyone who showed up from all over the world. I saw Mexico, I saw Chile, I saw a bunch of stuff. Y'all are wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ray. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.